Whoever you are, however formidable your faith, however doxastic your doubts, hello. I'm going to let Carl Sagan set the stage for today's bit of thinking. Quote, "At the heart of science is an essential balance between two seemingly contradictory attitudes. An openness to new ideas, no matter how bizarre or counterintuitive they may be, and the most ruthless skeptical scrutiny of all ideas, old and new. This is how deep truths are winnowed from deep nonsense." End quote. We're all living our first life here on Earth. We're all trying to do the best that we can with the information we've got. Even the wise Mr. Sagan was only drawing on a single life's experience, to the best of our knowledge. Because we know that people lie and exaggerate and reach flawed conclusions and make sloppy inferences, and we know that people can be deceived and mistaken, and we know that people have bad memories and can be subject to peer pressure and manipulation, does this mean that good evidence is always a purely subjective assessment, different for each person depending on what they find compelling? Or are there in fact good methods for removing our individual biases when assessing the truth of unprovable claims? Enter scepticism. Regrettably, it was as late as 2019 that I first came across street epistemology. There are a series of YouTube channels dedicated to this, and it's definitely something that I would encourage being a fan of. The basic idea is to engage with random members of the pedestrian public and investigate truth claims. How people know what they know. What people believe here isn't important, but the reasons for their beliefs are what we're trying to investigate. So to do this, the interviewer will ask a participant to pick a topic, generally something that they believe with conviction and influences their life in some meaningful way. Then together, they scrutinize how sure the volunteer can be about that claim. In a pure Socratic fashion, this isn't about agreeing or disagreeing with the claim. It's not a debate, it's not an argument, it's just about shaking the tree, uncovering the methods that ordinary people use to arrive at a particular belief, and asking, is this belief reasonable? The topics that often come up range from gender identity to holy books, ghosts, karma, the effectiveness of vaccines, but by far the most frequent and popular conversations are concerned with the existence or non-existence of a particular god. It's astonishing that 4,000 years after the first monotheistic religions emerged, discussions about the behavior, characteristics, and nature of God are still a philosophical hot potato. Because the logic that people use to justify their position is always colourful and insightful and malleable, theological questions just keep on giving. And naturally, once you've sunk into an epistemological mindset, you can't help but direct the same line of questioning at yourself. Like, what makes me think that health supplements don't really work? And how confident am I that positive thinking really can improve my life? And for this podcast, where exactly do I stand on God? Quick confession, my thoughts on the Almighty are largely geared towards the God of Christianity. He's the one that I bump into the most often, as I come from a Christian background. But really, my reasoning applies to any proposed supernatural intelligence. To address the question of whether God exists, I'm going to need to unpack a few ambiguous key terms. When I say reasonable, I mean with good justification for accepting a claim without being absolutely certain. An argument is justified if it's valid and logically sound, backed up with supporting evidence. And to say I believe something simply means that I've become convinced that the claim is true, not that it necessarily is true. And finally, for something to be regarded as knowledge, I think that means the claim must be both believed and justified, which you'll notice makes knowledge a kind of belief. Once again, absolute certainty is not required for something to pass as knowledge. There's no good reason to think that absolute certainty can ever be achieved in any ultimate sense about anything. So, with all of that housekeeping out of the way, why bother? If certainty is irrelevant to the issue of God or anything else, then why discuss it? Why debate it? The short answer is because we rarely wait until we have certainty, or even knowledge, before we act. Most of the time, our actions are based on our beliefs, and those actions have consequences. For this reason, no matter who we are, we should all be in the business of trying to believe as many reasonable things and as few unjustifiable things as is possible. Hopefully, we're all on the same page so far. A core value of mine is to try and maintain an accurate impression of the world and what it contains. For sure, year after year, I do keep missing the mark, but to claim that our perceptions reflect reality in any defensible way, our beliefs have to be reasonable. I'll start with an example. Think of a bowl of snakes. Don't worry about why, just imagine them there, in your mind's eye. Dozens of them, hundreds of them if you want, all writhing away. Now, logically, there has got to be either an even number or an odd number of snakes in the bowl. If you told me that you knew for a fact that there was an even number, I'd wonder how you could be sure. Without tipping them out and counting them, or weighing the bowl and dividing the entire weight by the weight of one snake, or making some other kind of empirical measurement, there's no reasonable way that someone could form a rock-solid opinion about whether the snakes were odd or even in number. Pointing out that you have no way to know that there's an even number of snakes doesn't mean that I believe there's an odd number. I simply don't know how many there are, and I have no information to ground a belief one way or the other. I am agnostic about it. This is my position on the subject of any creator god or intelligence behind the universe. I call myself an agnostic atheist, not because I believe there is no God, but because I have no reason to believe that there is one. In my opinion, not believing should be the default position until a claim can be proven one way or the other. Otherwise, we'd all believe all kinds of things instantly as soon as they were proposed to us. Whole encyclopedias of competing theories and incompatible claims would have to be wholeheartedly believed until the bad ideas could be weeded out. Disbelief until proven reasonable seems to be more compatible with sanity. So once we're comfortable with uncertainty, reason may be the only way to discriminate between incompatible and unprovable things. Not mere faith. Many people will argue that a belief in their particular God is reasonable. Here we come to an interesting complication. A person can become convinced for good or bad reasons. What passes for incontestable evidence in one person's eyes can be poppycock to someone else. It goes without saying that if the quality of evidence for a god's existence met everyone's standard, having been found to be valid and logically sound, it would be a pretty big deal. If such a universally satisfying proof emerged, it would be global news and change the face of philosophical and scientific inquiry forever. This hasn't happened yet, to my knowledge. Instead, pro-God arguments tend to be refuted or rebutted pretty consistently. Each time an idea is discredited or shown to be lacking, the theologians rework their ideas to avoid unpopular bits and then represent them in an endless cycle of creative thinking that's been going on for thousands of years. The oversight in all of this is that it attempts to guide evidence towards a favoured conclusion, when the evidence itself should be the guide. Faith alone is never going to separate fact from fiction, but at the opposite end of the belief scale, when God is believed to have revealed himself personally to someone, and that person presumably could not possibly be mistaken, that's usually where the conversation ends. Such an oracle has set the acceptance criteria for their own claim and instigated a circular argument. Stalemate. On a personal note, I think that revelation may be the best evidence that anyone could hope for. To witness the Almighty yourself, or to receive divine instruction directly, must carry a lot of persuasive clout when it comes to deciding whether a God exists. But revelation should only be considered good evidence by the revelatee. It should carry no weight whatsoever with anyone who wasn't party to this divine intervention themselves. For the rest of us, what constitutes good evidence should be repeatable, independently verifiable, falsifiable, and highly specific to the claim being tested. Thus, not all leaps of faith are equal. We can use philosophy to assess how firm our footing is before taking an intellectual leap. Or at least, we should. Currently, there are several long-standing arguments in the support of a deistic God. A god or some supernatural force that deliberately created the universe, but then didn't do anything after that. A deity doesn't specifically interfere with mortal affairs, judge us in thoughts or deeds, or tweak the code once the program's running. That's the distinction as I understand it. A deistic god sets the cosmic ball rolling before stepping aside, never to intervene in the unfolding of history. If you ask me, deistic arguments tend not to be as persuasive or elegant or comprehensive as more testable alternatives arising from scientific inquiry. But still, they can't be falsified. So I'm happy to admit that I don't know, but neither does anyone else. That's what makes existence such an enduring and alluring mystery. Because science doesn't currently have any explanation for why anything exists rather than nothing, doesn't make supernatural or divine explanations possible, plausible, likely, or proved by default. Invoking God as an explanation behind creation won't be compelling until it can explain what science currently can't. Namely, why a Big Bang was needed and not a steady-state universe at creation. Why there's so much dark matter compared to ordinary matter in the universe. Why there was so much matter relative to antimatter left over after the Big Bang. Why the universe looks so chaotic and random and unguided. Why there's so much empty space out there if life was the ultimate goal. And why so much of the universe involves complex interactions that seem superfluous. Obviously then, if there's a form of deism which also goes on to explain why certain subatomic particles go through generations while others don't, why the masses of known particles seem arbitrary yet universally consistent, and why the laws of physics couldn't be different elsewhere in the universe, it might truly be onto something. Without testable predictions, even the most compelling creation stories boil down to just so stories that don't progress our understanding in any way. However, if you find yourself convinced by one of them, if you feel confident that a supernatural being really did jumpstart the universe that we live in, there's still a very long way to go before you can defend a theistic God. Between deism and theism lies an unbridgeable gulf that logic and reason are unfit to straddle. The late, great, and at this point legendary social commentator Christopher Hitchens argued that even if we grant an ultimate prime mover, believers of any theistic faith would still have to prove that such a being knows who we are, that it cares about us personally, that it minds what we do, that it answers our prayers, that it has our best interests at heart, and that it's any kind of moral authority worth obeying. A packed itinerary of dubious leaps of faith. So I call myself an agnostic atheist because no thinker in history has been able to shift from a deistic position to a theistic one in any intellectually satisfying way. At least not to me. That so much of the world can be precisely explained and empirically verified without any detectable supernatural meddling is another good reason to suppose that no theistic God exists. But how might we combat epistemologically vapid claims like personal revelation which lack concrete evidence? One option is to try fighting holy fire with holy fire. It's damning to find over 1,000 denominations of Christianity alone offering conflicting interpretations of God's word and motivation and plan. The jury is pretty much still out on every tiny detail of the Holy Bible, as well as the big stuff like how do you get saved, what happens after death, and does free will exist in God's plan. Combining all of these Christian flavors with the myriad other religions on offer, not to mention the lines that have been discontinued by holy wars throughout history, we behold a bewilderingly long and varied menu of mutually unpalatable gods. Keep in mind that while not all of these gods can be true, all of them can be false. Religion was perhaps our species' first attempt to discover truth. For the longest time, it was the only tool that we had to comprehend the world around us. Before we discovered microorganisms, curses and evil spirits were the obvious cause of disease. Back then, our ignorant, terrified species could hardly be blamed for inventing superstitious explanations, especially as these stories went on to inspire the first philosophy, morality, healthcare, and policies for running ourselves. Lots of good came from it, to be sure, but because it was our first attempt, it was also our worst. Today we have far more robust and instructive explanations for all of these things, and the knowledge has been hard won. Humanity suffered for eons to sweep those mysteries away, yet many still willingly entertain systems of belief that regard critical thinking as a mortal sin. Science is often attacked for being too progressive, for revising its position as new data emerges over time. This is kryptonite to religious dogma, as science does not, and should not, maintain a rigid mindset impervious to scrutiny and learning. I've heard science described as a religion of naturalism, but I think this is a mistake. Rather than dismissing supernatural forces outright, it's more intellectually honest to say that science recognizes its investigative limits. Since nothing supernatural can be scientifically verified, almost by definition, we're stuck exploring natural causes. This is inconvenient because, to me, the existence of a supernatural God might be more plausible if any evidence for the supernatural could be found. Many theists will leap onto their tables at this point, evangelizing the plain truth of supernatural causation. Supporting anecdotes like divine guidance and instruction are never accompanied by tests or predictions that can be investigated. All of this indirect correlational evidence between natural and supernatural phenomena can only be useful if it's consistent, reliable, repeatable, and falsifiable. Only then can believers construct a reasonable case, and faith wouldn't have to be so blind. As it stands, over the eons, many natural phenomena that have historically been explained by supernatural intervention, the movement of the sun and the stars, the seasons, diseases, natural disasters, all of these things that used to have supernatural explanations now have widely accepted scientific ones. Absolutely nothing that we've ever had a scientific explanation for has given way to a new theistic one. One final thought while I'm getting all this off my chest. To try marrying Christian beliefs with anthropological history paints a very dark picture. For tens of thousands of years after our species appeared on the scene, the human race may have boasted an average life expectancy of around 30 or 40 years. Infant mortality would have been sky high during the infancy of our species. Bacterial and viral disease would have been devastating and terrifying, as there was little hope of prevention or remedy. Our earliest ancestors must have been periodically annihilated in droves by disease, natural disasters, and harsh environmental changes. All of these things took their toll, but nothing could compare to the threat of a violent death by other tribes. Perpetual war defined and consumed the first human societies, erupting over land, access to females, food, water, shelter, and revenge, anything that it is possible to fight over. Theists would have to believe that for around 95% of our time on this planet, heaven passively watched over our relentless hardships, refusing to help. Only around 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, after the Zoroastrians had come up with the first working model for monotheism, did the Christian God finally show up to offer us a shot at redemption. He chose to do this using mass murder, human sacrifice, and plagues, if the Old Testament is to be believed, as if there were no better way to make us behave ourselves. Considering God's grand intervention was not staged at a time or place where many people could reason, read, or investigate scientifically, it's no surprise that proof of these ancient claims remains so elusive. God would have predicted this, of course. An intelligent creator, having set people in a world where evidence is so crucial to the formation of knowledge, would be well aware of our inability to investigate supernatural events. With the debate still unresolved after millennia of careful, painstaking, and sincere deliberation by generations of educated, enlightened, highly intelligent thinkers, it's still not unreasonable to maintain the default position that no God exists. Now that we have our skeptical hats on, and we're all chanting the mantra, "How do you know?", we're ready to regard the world in a new light, and ask, if there is a God, what is this God like? What does it want? How does it interact with reality? And what can we learn about an artist by admiring her creation?